Greetings, welcome to the Diabetic Mogul podcast. On this podcast, we will offer standard and recommended practice of not only managing your diabetes well, but how you can get involved in advocating for proper access to healthcare and bringing opportunities within the diabetes online community. It's Tino, a patient advocate and a certified diabetes educator.
I'm Kona. I'm a recently graduated medical doctor. Together, we want to raise awareness, open a discussion about diabetes, share ideas, thoughts, different perspectives, and overall create a safe environment for everyone who needs to express his or her thoughts.
We'll be hosting a series of podcast episodes from people living with diabetes, caregivers, healthcare providers, researchers, and we encourage you to get involved, get engaged, and come up together to create the change that we need.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Diabetic Mogul podcast. As you see, I'm not Tino, I'm Kona. I will be hosting some series of podcasts. So we have Gavin here with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Nice to join you. Nice to see you, Connor. My name's Gavin. I'm a person living with type 1 diabetes, and I have done since my childhood. I'm from the United Kingdom.
Could you explain more your connection with diabetes, your diagnosis, how that affected you? How's your life with it?
Sure, yeah. The connection with diabetes. Maybe a lot of people listening will have the same connection, that deep and sacred bond that we had no choice to have when the beta cells were destroyed inside me. From there, I had this journey of living with it, growing with it, adapting to life with type 1 diabetes. Yeah. So I'm a person living with it. What I would say with diagnosis is that's one of the biggest, and that's the first hurdle for everybody. And what perhaps isn't considered globally, really around the world enough, is the psychological concept of that. And that can have a long lasting impact. You hear a lot of information, a lot of scientific words that you'd never imagine you have to do. You're not trained in that in most cases. It's a huge thing for you to adapt to, or even perhaps more so if you're a child. Your parents, who have the greater disadvantage of naturally worrying about their child's well-being and not feeling the symptoms or the signs of a high or a low blood sugar, only kind of multiplying their worries. I think firstly, that's where I struggled. Perhaps going back to school, being the only child in the school with this condition, it's not being so visible of having this condition, and yet it has these impacts where I remember when I was young, I had a lot of hyper blood sugars. I wasn't testing my blood sugar remotely often at all to know what was going on, to recognize those highs. I just needed the toilet all the time. And little things like that made me slightly different to other people in the school class. Yeah, I remember having that kind of maybe social anxiety could even be the word about life with this condition and how I felt about that. I just wanted to be me, getting out there, getting on with it and living my life. I felt that was probably the first hurdle to overcome, was realizing I can be that person, particularly when it came to sports and the things that I was personally interested. Yeah, diagnosis was tough. Maybe the years after adapting to it, going back to school was even tougher. But ultimately, I've been able to go and do what I've been able to do in my life and experience what I've been able to experience, really because of that moment of diagnosis, because of having the opportunity to understand my body, work with it, perhaps value life all the more. With 2% of a pancreas not doing its job, how incredible.
So, what age were you diagnosed?
I was 8 years old.
You state the stigma, the psychological effect. I think we belong to a generation that had to switch from a very traditional way of managing diabetes to technology, because I was also diagnosed at the age of 10, and then I was using test strips and pens, and now to CGMs and pumps and stuff like that. So we've both experienced two different approaches to diabetes management, which are very different. Have you find challenges that maybe people with diabetes face in the UK, which can be considered a country that has covered good overall healthcare system?
Yeah, I think the UK is an interesting one. I think wherever you are in the world, there's always room for improvement. Yeah, you could say on one hand, in the United Kingdom, you're very blessed in the fact that there is access to these technologies that we mentioned. It's not coming out of pocket even, and even the basics of insulin and have been funded. Yeah, people aren't struggling in that area. That's a positive light. But as I say, wherever you are in the world, there is always room for improvement because of the technologies and stuff. That doesn't just make diabetes easy. I think it's a different thing to adapt to, really, whatever your situation. And this is where we're at in the world today. We're at a place where one person is testing their blood sugars, finger pricking, another person's scanning, another person's got their phone out and got a CGM. So diabetes management is so different and personalized to each individual, and never more now than ever before. It's a case where in the UK, that's the big situation, I would say. That's probably one of the biggest challenges in the UK, is that if you're a healthcare team, diabetes education is something you've got to keep on the ball with all the latest developments and updates to know each individual person with diabetes, how to give them the best advice, because it's so different and varied for every individual. So I think that's one of the big challenges. I also think in terms of the UK, right now, I'm in Northern Ireland. I don't live in Northern Ireland. I've been doing a workshop these last few days over here. I also come from Southeast London in England, Southeast London. What I know is there's an issue that we call the postcode lottery of the United Kingdom. And as I said, basics and stuff, what you would call insulin and things, they're covered wherever you are. However, there seems to be an imbalance from region to region of the United Kingdom of what is more recommended or what is more accessible. There's also a big gap between pediatrics, adults in diabetes care, and meaning global issue there. I think it's a real challenge to get on the pumps and CGMs, get that funded as an adult, as opposed to perhaps most of the children around the UK are probably getting those things funded, which is great. There's huge gaps and differences where you are and what age you are in terms of what you can get access to. So as I say, there's always room for improvement. And I think that the health system over here needs to be better unified in its approach to diabetes management.
That's a great answer. We've talked about the challenges you faced and we faced as diabetics, also given the fact that your diagnosis was in an early age, but also you said that you have learned from diabetes, you have learned your body. Can you talk to us about that, what you have gained from diabetes, what you have learned from the disease so far?
It's an interesting one because nobody's going to get diagnosed with any medical condition and feel happy about that happening, perhaps. But this is the situation. There's nothing I could do about it. There's nothing anybody could do about it. This is the situation that came my way in life. With that, I had no choice but to learn about my body. Actually, I've seen the positives and I've tried to look more positives than negatives. There are both negatives and there are positives, and that's part of life, right? It's not sunshine and rainbows. In life, it's not always going to be great and whatever else, but at the same time, it doesn't always have to be down, dark and gloomy. You can, it's your life to live with or without diabetes. That's the case. For me, I feel that I've learned, it's certainly getting not just living with diabetes, but then of course getting more involved in the diabetes world, if you like, with healthcare, with work, with charities and just fundraising and things like that, and the people that I've met. I feel that from there, I've learned a lot about myself. I've probably learned the most about myself through going out and running marathons and challenges like that. I've had to learn my body and how to go about doing that. But at the same time, I've also learned, at those medical events, those scientific congresses and stuff, that it's not my area, so to speak, of expertise. I've learned these amazing facts that have only made me more impressed about life, if I'm honest. And I think I mentioned earlier, like just 2% of the pancreas doesn't work. Little facts like that means everything that I'm doing, all this work to monitor my blood sugar levels, try and get them in range, it's just down to 2% of the pancreas, which shows you how incredible life is, how vulnerable it is, but how amazing it is that all these tiny microscopic cells are just doing things 24/7. Well, maybe just 2% of them aren't, to give me this gift of life, that I can talk to you right now, I can see you right now, I can breathe, I can, do all these things. So when you see life in that angle, there's get off the screen, get off social media and get out and start living, because that's the opportunity you've got. That would be my message from this life experience of being taught to be through diabetes.
That's inspiring. You said that you're involved in healthcare and advocacy. I see that you started as in a program for young leaders of diabetes, and then you continue with working with IDF, International Diabetes Federation. Can you say about this journey?
Yeah, interesting one. To be honest, I started really young, which was a good thing for me because, as I mentioned, there's a big gap between children, pediatrics, and then going into adult diabetes care. At that point in my life, I'd been this rebel against my own health, my own diabetes to an extent, without realizing it in those school years. But then at the age of 17, I had this moment that changed everything for me, to be honest. And that was on a school camping trip, nothing to do with diabetes at all. But I was there being a camp leader, if you like, for the school. There's the younger kids, the year sevens that we call them over here. So, 11, 12-year-olds. And one child had type 1 diabetes. The teacher came and got me and he was crying his eyes out. He hated diabetes. He had a hypo. He was just letting out this frustration. And I could relate to that. I could relate to that so much because that's how I felt when I was his age. The only difference was I didn't do that. I didn't let it out. I just bottled it up, and that wasn't good for me. And so I felt quite emotional when seeing this child. And that was really the first engagement where I realized I could actually support another person with diabetes. From there, I decided that there needs to be some more positives. I had no clue how to make them. I went on to start up or co-start with a few others locally. a local diabetes support group in my local area, and we tried to meet up for young adults. It wasn't so successful, but we gave it a go. I ran my first marathon as well at the same time as a fundraiser. And yeah, I remember just doing those positive things at that time in my life opened this journey that I've been on ever since. And yeah, a couple of years after that, I was getting involved in things. I was essentially a young leader through doing what I was doing. It was at a time when social media was becoming more of a thing, which makes me sound old. Yeah, I got the opportunity to go to a World Diabetes Congress a few years later. In 2013, I went to that. So at that point, I'd probably been doing stuff for diabetes for 5 or 6 years. But yeah, I came to this young leaders training. At that point, I'd never met somebody overseas. I never actually stopped and thought about it, to be honest, of what diabetes is like around the world. So being a young leader through the IDF really changed my perspective of healthcare and diabetes care and the different situations around the world. It really opened up my eyes, and I made some great friends in that program, because that was the biggest thing I took from it. Was I made these friends, and these friends had diabetes in common, and so we might have had such differences from everything, the way we are, the food we eat, the way we dress, the cultures we have, etc. And yet there was just that unique bond that was driven through the diabetes connection. I decided to carry that on a bit, and I started to make my project overseas as well as in the UK. And those projects were really about how can we make diabetes education a bit more fun or a bit more relatable to people and less clinical and inside these hospital walls, so they can then, psychologically speaking, I suppose, feel good about it. So that was kind of my project. I went around. I remember going to Ghana. I teamed up with my friend Fred over there and stayed at his house. We did a project over there and met some incredible people doing great things in a local support group called Diabetes Youth Care. That's gone on and it's grown ever since then. So I'm really happy to see that. Yeah, it was just little connections like that actually saw me step by step meet new people, work on new projects, bounce ideas with each other. And that was a real changing thing, if I'm honest. After that, in 2015, I completed my young leaders journey. I guess I'm now OLD instead of YLD, old leaders in diabetes. And it was a bit different, the program. I think it was built out of love, this program, and it still exists with love. And I'm really happy to see that. But if I'm honest, there were some perhaps challenging times with the IDF around that period as well. There was a lot of doubt as to what was going to happen with the future of this program. I got elected into a place by the young leaders where we had like a, kind of like committee sort of thing going on. And there was just a disaster at the time of a lot of resignations and stuff going on. Yeah, I was just caught in this mess of how can this survive? And I knew that there was real potential through the IDF. I knew that more so that this program had such a gift with the young people coming into it. So it was like a 2-year battle. Nobody knew what was going on. I was trying to be transparent with the situation whilst trying to progress things as well. I think now I'm really happy to see, I came back recently to Lisbon. I think the IDF have really progressed really well in recent years, bouncing back from perhaps those struggles that they faced. And I think you all need struggles in life. You need these struggles to actually then grow from and reflect on. And I really saw YLD in such a good place as well. It was smaller to an extent, but it had a new foundation. It was like, bring your projects first and then go away and work on those. And as opposed to perhaps in the past, we were a little bit guilty of coming in, being absolutely amazed by the experience, but not having these projects at hand or idea of what to follow up with. So I really see it structured in a really strong way. And I'd absolutely advocate for that program every day of my life, because I think there's such great people in there, and there will continue to be great people getting the opportunity to come through there and be inspired and then come away with such progressive ideas in diabetes care for the long-term future. Yeah, my relationship with IDF, if I'm completely honest, and I know they won't mind me saying, was up and down for a bit. I even got a nice little award from them in 2019, a long-standing achiever award or something like that in Europe. So yeah, it was a nice thing to see. I just think that the more there are voices from within that live with diabetes, that experience it, and they can connect with the more clinical side of things, the healthcare professionals, the big organizations, then there's a great balance. Yeah, that's my journey, if you like, with YLD and IDF.
That's great. That's really great and inspiring. I agree. How touching, important is for diabetic people to be connected. For example, me, as I grew up, I didn't have much of diabetic friends. I still don't have diabetic close friends. I wish I had. Being connected online to people with diabetes makes me feel less lonely. See that people are going through the same things, although I cannot easily express or explain to my best friend what hypo means or what feeling your blood sugar rising or the stress. What have you learned from this? Like how important is to be surrounded or have a network of people who are going through the same? So maybe that was the aim of your foundation, the League of the Athletes, this connection. Could you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. Peer-to-peer is empowerment, it's support, and it's so unique. I started a charity called what's called Diathlete, and that had a more sporty vibe. It started from my years of marathon run-ins and sharing about perhaps more in a time 10 years ago even where exercise and diabetes wasn't spoken about often enough. So there I was running these marathons pretty well, blogging about it, and it got a little bit of interest from there. And now there's a team, there's a new group of trustees that have gone and taken that on. I'm not actually a trustee of it anymore. I volunteer, of course, being supporter and obviously involved where I can be, running workshops and stuff like I've done recently here in Northern Ireland. But yeah, I'm not behind it anymore. And I love that because I like to see the next generation come in and take it to new directions. So they've had a bit of a rebrand. Diathlete still exists. That's the registered name. That's where they're going to talk about sports. But the League of Diabetes is now what they're kind of reshaping it as. And that's where we've got this network of, firstly, global organizations that are similar to Diathlete. They're not big. They're not funded, if you like. They've got a great reach. They're doing great things. But they're founded like people like you and I who live with type 1 diabetes themselves or have that personal connection as a caregiver or something like that. And they've gone and founded it really grassroots, and they're doing the local stuff. They're working with their hospital teams. They're bringing people out in recreational ways. And so we kind of bounce ideas as a network, very informally, if you like, nothing too structured, nothing too professional. But these ideas work. The workshops outside of the hospital walls, bringing people together. And the heart of it is what you said, is that peer-to-peer experience. I think there's a big space of it online. I think that's a great place to go to particularly once you get diagnosed. But it can be so much to take in. And I would say my observation sometimes with online is sometimes there can be quite an intensity. And that depends on how you're feeling with your journey of diabetes, the individual side of it, because sometimes there can be too much emotion getting out there. And sometimes that puts you off a little bit. You got to pick and I think the good thing about social media is you can pick and choose what you want to tune into and what you want to listen to. And I think that's such an advantage. And I recommend anybody to just have a look, see what works, follow, get involved with what works for you. But don't be switched off if something doesn't work for you. Don't be angry either at that, because that probably works for somebody else. But then keep looking because those options are there, and reach out. And I think what I like to see, with the League of Diabetes, I like to do, particularly in the UK as well, because now they've not just got the global network, but they're also running events in the UK, like camps and workshops. It's bringing people together as well, face to face. I think there's a lot you can receive online. But there is a face-to-face need as well sometimes when you get people in the same room. And it's not easy globally to do, but maybe if you can connect, different people in different countries can reach their local communities and bring people together. That's what we're kind of about.
Yeah, certainly. Concerning me, for many years, I was scared to work out and do sports because of my diabetes. I was scared to go low, go too high. I couldn't manage it. For some years, I was avoiding to do sports. That's not the case anymore. But what advice could you give to any person struggling to take action, try to manage diabetes with exercise, which can be a bit tricky to find the balance? What would be your advice, or what have you learned so far from parents or young people with diabetes doing sports?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, as I say, it can be so different for everybody once again. But I think the first thing, if I speak personally, that really helped me was simply put getting out there, just getting out there. And yeah, different stages of life or different experiences like a hypo can happen, and that can really dent your confidence. And I think diabetes is sometimes it's that journey of confidence. But yeah, I think for me, what really helped me as a child, particularly when I was trying to deny my diabetes or hide away from it and feel like the only child with it almost, was simply getting back on the football field. I loved football as a child, playing the game and kind of seeing for myself there that I'm able to play the game. And that just was a big confidence boost, that I was doing the thing I enjoyed the most and was allowed to do it. And I think with parents, particularly if they've got a child, I think that's maybe point one, is parents can worry more, and that can impact the child. And it's understandable that natural worry for your child is always going to be there if you're a parent, but it's controlling that, because whilst they're, I don't know, shouting up the stairs saying, have you checked your blood, and stressing out, they maybe with technology seeing the child is a little bit higher, a little bit low, and freaking out about that. The child's there not caring one bit, about that. They're like, yeah, I've got it sorted. They'll take the glucose taps, or they'll sort it out when they come around sorting it out. And so it's a waste of the parents' time almost to spend the time worrying. They're just giving themselves unnecessary anxiety if you look at it in that way. And I think you've got to kind of consume that a little bit and not be the reason that your child can't do something, because diabetes shouldn't be that reason. And I think with the child, or even any individual, particularly with sports, getting out there first and foremost gives you that feeling, I'm out there and diabetes isn't stopping me. And then I think that's where you have the learning curve. That's where I learned about my body because I started to run marathons. I had to, and this was a time when, I was finger pricking as I learned, which didn't give me the information of what that level was doing. I had a number, but not a direction, not an arrow that a CGM might give you. That for me was interesting. I actually got excited about running's boring, if you ask me. I've done over 100 marathons and stuff, and it can be a boring thing to do, running. But if you put diabetes into it, it becomes quite interesting. If I say that, because I'm thinking, right, it's not just about the run. It's more like Formula One racing. You've got to decide when to change the tires and have your pit stop at the right time. So you've got to fuel up on your energy drinks at certain times. And I always got quite excited about that, weirdly, when I was running marathons. So yeah, it depends how you want to see it. But for me, when I had the lows or the highs, they were great tools in my research of my body to say, okay, why did that happen? Why did that happen? And I looked back at the little clues that were there. Okay, I had my insulin quite close to when I started, so I might have dropped a lot quicker when I started, or I had a big meal and it kicked in. It was quite a fatty meal and it kicked in an hour along the road after running. You look at the little details of your day, which you can absolutely do if you've got the advantage of being on the technology. You can probably do more now than ever before. But back then, I did it with a little scrapbook. I was writing down the notes of what was going on. I was testing my blood sugar. And
that was my
so, use your tools wisely, and it's how you want to see it. But the best advice is the most simplest one, is get out there and do your thing. That way you'll find the love of what you're doing, and diabetes comes into that love.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Staying of the athletes part, could you break down the key words, educate, encourage, and empower? What perception of these words?
Yeah, they're all linked for me in what that's all about. And so educate, encourage, empower. I believe that type 1 diabetes education is absolutely essential. That's a no-brainer, right? You can't just go out there not knowing or not having any idea what to do. So you need the education. But if that education is not relating to you, if it's a bit too serious, it's a bit too clinical, if it's in words that you don't necessarily understand, if it's lectured and you're bored and you're not taking it in, then it's not really going to be much use, because you won't know how to use that education. So therefore, education needs to connect with encouragement. That encouragement is the relatability. It's something that makes you feel, I want to learn. I want to know. I feel that I get it. And so if you change the approach of education to be encouraging, then that leads to, long-term outcomes. That leads to the independence of the person managing their condition, as opposed to being told how to manage it and not really always getting where they want to be. And so it then links into empowerment, in my opinion, because once you've got the blend of the education, getting through, the person then applying that education willingly to themselves and in how they act, that's where you get empowerment, because then they're the person that inspires the next generation or the next person with diabetes to say, well, look, this is how to go about it. This is what works. So I think it goes in like that holy trio, if you like. You get the education, it goes with encouragement, and from there, the outcomes are empowering, because you see people living their full lives as a result of diabetes, and how it all links back in that same circle, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms you mentioned pretty much, and I totally agree with the clinical part of diabetes that can be scary to some children or young adolescents which are newly diagnosed. We're talking about a holistic approach to diabetes. So what is your message to healthcare professionals who sometimes get too much concerned about numbers or everything being strictly into plan, the psychological part, the daily aspects of diabetes, the daily life of diabetic people? What's your opinion? What's your advice, your thoughts, everything?
Well, life isn't about numbers, is it? We're out here to live and to enjoy life and to make the most of the opportunity that is life. If we just look at a bit of paper, an end of year result, a red mark on a budget, or a load of digits, then we aren't really telling the truth of what life is. And so, my message there is to be understanding, really, for health professionals and anybody working in diabetes, to understand that there is that individual side, there is that life side, and you don't know what necessarily is going on behind the scenes. I remember when I was young, my GP, which we sometimes have to see, but not really are our go-to for diabetes, looked at my HbA1c, which was 7.6 at the time, or 7.7, something along those lines. It was in the sevens. Told me, why have you got poor control? to be honest, if he'd looked at all the numbers that he was looking at anyway, he would have seen that throughout my childhood before that. I mean, I was about 21 at the time, maybe 22. I'd never been lower than 7.6 or 7.7. I'd been 9, I'd been 8. So actually, that was me making a real improvement at a time when I was having 3 test strips a day provided in my local area to manage my blood sugars. So 7.6 or 7.7 was really great. It was good work. And yeah, I was being asked, why have you got poor control? And I remember having a right old argument with said GP who didn't take well to the patient, having to go back and saying, well, I'm doing all right here. I don't think it's poor. Don't call me poor. Yeah, I remember having that kind of heated exchange and as a kind of young adult myself, who at that point I was running marathons and stuff. So I had a bit of an ego. So I wasn't too happy about him telling me I had poor control. And I didn't shy away from letting him know about that. But yeah, what I would say is that that's the wrong approach, to judge somebody and say, oh, he's poor. Well, you try and do that every day. And at the time, it was in the area, it was 3 test strips a day that we were given. Sometimes I got away with 4 tests a day if I could, provided on the NHS. That's greatly changed now, actually motivated me to make a campaign at the time in my local borough to try and change that, which was a cool project to do. Yeah, and what I would say is, though, back to the holistic approach, is here in Northern Ireland, for example, I've been part of this workshop out here. And what we've got is a connection of really, it's led by the health professionals here. And what they've done yesterday was a fantastic event. It was a very long day for me because we had a workshop, multiple workshops of different age groups and parents. So it was 2 hours each session. We had a lot of different speakers. There's a lot of the health team from psychologists and dietitians that they had from the different hospitals coming together to give their time and give talks. But it was balanced out with people like me living with diabetes and relating to the audience in another way. And that balance was the perfect blend, if you like, of you've got the clinical information, but here's also the relatable information. That way they're not being burnt out by all this information. They're breaking it up. They're learning different ways of different voices and not just being sat down, lectured to, but also moving up and meeting other people, meeting peers. And I think that's a real effective way to teach. Yeah, they went really, really well. And it was different age groups. So we first had the really young ones, and then the next session was the age group above, and then it was like the up to 20-year-olds that we had come in the end. So yeah, for me, health professionals are the clinical experts. If they've been trained the right way, they have to also be educated and encouraged and empowered and keep up to date with this changing world. And we are absolutely the experts, because we're the ones who make the decisions 24/7 for our health. So it makes sense if you can blend in peers, people with diabetes, their experiences. I'd like to add to that help to parents, to actually speak to other parents. I can reach the parents. Parents want to see me and say, I want my child to be like him. That's hope right there, because he's healthy and he's grown up. That's a relief for them. But what they also could do if it was talking face to face and not online, in my opinion, more so with parents, with other parents, and they don't have that opportunity. They don't have psychological support with parents who probably need it even more than anybody else in diabetes. So I do believe in the peer-to-peer methods. And I think if that goes hand in hand with the clinical and the health professional teams, like I've seen the Southern Trust in Northern Ireland do, then you're going to bring great outcomes for people with diabetes.
That's great. That sums up everything that should be listened by every healthcare professional in the diabetes field. I want to thank you so much for this podcast, for sharing your experience, your ideas, everything. I wish you health, good blood sugars, continue the job that you do. It's great. It's inspiring. Thank you so much, Gavin, for being here.
Thank you, Connor. Nice to meet you and to chat to you. And also thank you, Tino, for the platform you're doing here as well. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Take care.